Hello everybody and welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. My name is Deborah Hatswell and you're listening to BBR Investigations. There is a question that intrigues me. Why do human beings enjoy being scared? From roller coasters to haunted escape rooms, we soak up the thrill. It's why we tell horror stories as children and watch macabre films at the cinema or on TV. For some people, there's an enjoyment in the adrenaline rush. It makes you feel alive. It breaks you from the minutiae of the daily grind. I work in some of the scariest places in the UK. I go into buildings and woodlands that many would run from. But you put a scarecrow in there and I am not going in. I have an irrational fear of them. Something about them moving terrifies me. Every human has a fear of something. It's a base fear, a primal reaction. It keeps you out of danger, keeps you alive. And some of us cannot get enough of the adrenaline. So we schedule, book, and create events where we can enjoy fear in a controlled environment. A safe fear with limitations and a timeout clause if needed. Real fear, unexpected fear, is a very different kettle of fish and can leave a traumatic stain on your psyche that is still there many years later. Whether that fear bringer is a dogman, a ghost, a Bigfoot, a reptilian, an alien, or an entity, isn't what's important here. It's the effect that the event has on a person, immediately, and also for many years to come. Sharing that event with others is part of the healing process. Like any traumatic episode, it has to be worked through, as there are no shortcuts, no quick fixes, only the slow process of getting better over time. What worked for my trauma was discussing what happened to me in the hope of understanding it, and thousands of people worldwide feel the same. So I'd like to share some cases with you that involve people who have had events that terrified them, whether that's being chased from the woodland by a horrifying creature, or sitting in your attic when you feel a person breathing on your neck. Cases like this happen all across the world, far more often than we realise. And there is no preferred demographic for fear. It's happy to take any victim that crosses its path. I was contacted by a gentleman who had some experiences in life that he remembers clearly all these years later, and he didn't mind me sharing them with you. And this is called A White-Faced Man in a Top Hat and Tails. Daniel got in touch with me at BBR and he said, I'm now almost 52 years of age, but when I was 8, I lived on Howard Road in Cambridge. I walked every day from home to Fenditton School in the nearby village. Our art teacher lived in a mansion house close by to the village and told us of hearing strange noises in the night, like disembodied footsteps and the clinking of money, which she believed was the ghostly sound of workers who died while building the house counting out their pay. Walking from the church, there was a path leading to Howard Road, and it was a quicker route, cutting through the hedgerow with some fields on either side. It was known to us children as Snake Path, and slightly down the path was also a right-hand bend, leading to the mansion and another house. One late evening, I decided to brave it on my grifter bicycle. I'd always had a terrible fear, and lots of fears. I was afraid of being alone in a room, afraid of the noise of the toilet flush, and very afraid of the dark. As I headed down the path and near the bend, I saw a man in a top hat and tails, standing ahead of me, in front of the gate to the field behind him. He had a beard, he was a white colour, and I could see through him. I stopped and placed my feet on the floor. What happened next traumatised me, and to this day, I don't know which version of the event is true. Either he began to walk towards me, and I pedalled away like greased lightning in a terrible fear, which is the most likely looking back on things, or he walked towards me and stood beside me as I remained there, petrified, and bent down and turned his face towards me, at which point I pedalled away from him. I rode home in terrible fear. I think the first version is the most likely one, Deb, and the second is likely my imagination due to the fear, but I can't be certain on that. I've been back to the spot a couple of times in adulthood. I felt chills up my spine, but I saw nothing. My mother has spoken of seeing fairies around the bonfire in the back garden of the home. She also saw the spirit of an Indigenous American, and he followed her from room to room and tried to persuade her to become a time traveller. My great-great-grandmother, great-grandmother, and grandmother were all mediums. I only met my grandmother a few times and stayed a short while at her house visiting. I recall reading newspaper clippings of my grandmother's ghost-busting stories, but neither my mother nor myself have ever wanted anything to do with all of that. It's always terrified me. I couldn't do what you do, Deb. I'd have to change my underpants several times a day. In 1997, I lived in Victoria Road, Cambridge. I was given a room in a set of buildings by the Housing Association. One day, while lying on my bed looking at the ceiling with my eyes wide open, I saw, suddenly, what I can only describe as a very large black silk handkerchief, and it appeared under the ceiling above me, and it glided from one side of the ceiling to the other and disappeared. A momentary shudder of fear passed through me. However, it was not my own fear, but the spirit of fear that's always been within me, having gained access to me through trauma. I believe I saw a demon. However, of its name or purpose, I have no idea to this day. The event with the Hat Man must have been horrible for Daniel. As an adult, you have a reasoning, at the forefront of your mind, you're trying to work out what's gone on. We are taught to not trust what we see, feel, or hear. Even our ability to think for ourselves in an everyday situation has been watered down so much over the centuries that now we need to fact check everything online before we follow what our gut told us in the first place. As a society, we have to get back to accepting that human beings are capable of extraordinary things. Our next case was sent to me from a Redditor who wanted my opinion on what had gone on here, and it's called A Cold Breath in the Attic. When I was a kid, I got a huge kick out of hiding in various spots around our house, and then, going out and scaring my mum or my sister whenever they'd walk past. The challenge was finding new spots that they wouldn't see coming or that, didn't know I'd used before. I wanted to get a good scare on them this day, but I didn't want to have to wait an eternity for someone to come by. This only happened once, and it still scares me when I think about it. I picked a spot in our attic on this day. I knew my mum would be coming up there because she was going to get out props for the church play that we kept there. So I set up behind a stack of boxes and waited. About 5 or 6 minutes in, I heard someone very faintly say, as if me being there was interesting or maybe unexpected. The sound came from almost directly behind me, and I immediately froze. And then I felt breath on the back of my neck. Now, I was raised on a farm, and the number one rule when encountering something that you assume you have no control over, wherever that may be, is to not make any sudden movements. And then you slowly remove yourself from the situation and create distance without provoking whatever you're faced with. So somehow I sat there for about 20 seconds, stock still, absolutely terrified. And after that, I slowly stood up and started to move away. I wasn't about to turn round and look behind me. I got 2 steps and then a hand clamped down on my right shoulder. I screamed, wrenching away, and I ran until I was out of the house. Once outside, my mum and my sister came running to see why I was screaming. They'd been outside with our dogs the whole time. My dad was at our other property almost 10 miles away. Sure, I couldn't have imagined it. I kept trying to tell myself it never happened, and it never happened again. Nobody would believe me though. My mum and dad both made multiple trips to the attic to show me, there's nothing up there. I don't know what it was, but it was something. I don't know how to describe the way the hand felt. I was obviously wearing a shirt, so there was no skin-to-skin connection or anything like that. This was in the summer, and I was in the attic, so it didn't feel cold or anything. I've heard people say that they experience ghost talk maybe sometimes, and a cold spot will happen, but it wasn't anything like that. I guess it felt like when you were in elementary school and your teacher put a hand on your shoulder to stop you, like, hey, hold on there, my young man, type of thing. Does that make sense, Deb? Well, it does, in all honesty. I cannot imagine what that breath and that hand felt like. I think dealing with cryptids is far easier than dealing with disembodied voices and hands that clutch at you in the dark, dusty attic. I don't know what he experienced that day. I really don't. But he heard it and he felt it, and it clearly left a mark on him. Thankfully, our next case is centred around the sightings of a Sasquatch by children in the homestead, so a little bit tamer, thankfully. Our next witness, who goes by the name CK, went to the Bigfoot Field Research Organisation to share a sighting that he had on his grandmother's property in 1983. He said him and his brothers and sisters and cousins also saw a Bigfoot one day in the tree line when it was standing behind a cottonwood tree, and it was watching the children as they play. Now, CK went on to explain, my grandmother's property is way out there. If you're driving on the main highway approximately 4 miles before the left-hand turn-off on the Kitwanga Reserve on the left of the highway, you'll see the partial remains of what once was our family farm. Now it's abandoned after the death of my grandmother, but the pond is still there. The nearest town on the map that you'll find is Hazleton, BC. It was 1983 or 84, and me and my brothers, one now passed away, with 2 of our cousins, were playing on my grandmother's farm. The farm was way out there. There was no electricity, no water, anything like that. It was around dinner time, so about 4:30 p.m, and it was midsummer, so it was pretty hot, and there were lots of daylight out. We were playing keep away with a stick and our dogs. Suddenly, our geese freaked out, came running up the path which led from our beaver pond near the smokehouse. At the same time, both of our dogs were under the house, which was strange since they were both well known for chasing bears up trees. We were all confused and wondering what was happening when my brother said, "What the hell is that?" And that's when we all looked at the direction he was looking and pointing, and there, just in the shadows of the bushes beside our smokehouse, was this thing, which I now believe was a Bigfoot. It was standing there looking at us. It didn't make a sound or any movement. It just stood there and watched us. My dad and my grandma, who sadly passed away, had come to the porch to see what was going on, and you could see that my dad was shocked to see what he was looking at. We couldn't make out any facial features of the creature, but our smokehouse door was 6 feet tall, and the creature was at least another foot or more taller than that, and it was very wide, with broad shoulders. My dad told us to get inside the house. I asked what it was, and my grandma said, "It's probably a Bigfoot," and went inside without a second look. I asked the nearby people in the village, and they have stories going back more than 80 years of sightings in the region. I'm convinced I saw a Sasquatch that day. I've never seen the creature again, but I am convinced that he lives there to this day, because now the farm is gone, but the pond's there, and the woods are untouched. I swear on my life and to God that my statement is true, and to the best of my recollection. I think he was just having a look at what we were doing, and then he went on his way. The ground was hard as heck, so there was no footprints. Like I say, it was a dry, hot summer. One of the people on the res told me stories of their own, and I talked to a woman in Hazleton, BC, that swears to me that her niece was abducted by a Bigfoot, never to be seen again. Now, I don't know how much truth there is to her story, but she seems sincere. It was so hot that year that the property had run dry. That's what the animals were spending more time around the pond for. The farm has a creek running on the side of the property, surrounded by mountains and woods all the way back. There's no neighbours for almost 5 miles, and the pond at the back of the property has woods, and it's mostly evergreen forest. About a quarter of a mile into the woods, there's a river backwash, which we used to go play in as little kids. Maybe the Bigfoot was at the property looking for food, you know? The smell of the smoker may have attracted it. There was a pond on the property, and it may have been the only water source for miles around. A combination of factors, including the heat, may have brought the creature out into the open. It didn't seem to want to harden the children or scare them. It seemed to just watch them as they played. And we have heard reports of that before. CK's case reminded me of the tale of the Minerva Monster, who terrified, absolutely terrified, at least one local family. Now, the Minerva Monster happened in 1978, and Herbert Caton had just cleared an area near a deep pit by his home. His work was done, and he filled the pit with garbage and just settled in, for a few days' rest after the job. A few nights later, Caton's grandchildren and their friends came running into the house, claiming to have seen a large hairy monster rummaging through the rubbish in the pit. The children were obviously terrified, believing a threatening mountain man or a crazed hermit was just outside the home. Hal Caton, his mother Evelyn Caton, and her daughter Vicky Keck went outside to investigate. They noted that the dogs were going berserk, and as they walked up the small hill leading to the pit, that got worse. As they approached the pit, they saw a large, thickly haired monster, about 7 feet tall, and weighing in at an estimated 300 pounds. Evelyn later commented, "It just stood there. It didn't move, but I almost broke my neck running back down the hill to get away from it." A few days later, Evelyn Caton saw the creature again, picking through the same garbage in the pit. She noted that the creature was bipedal. It was upright, walking on 2 legs. It had long hair covering its face. The creature's hair was thick, and although she could not make out any of its facial features, she recalled it had no visible neck. Again, her dogs went wild, tugging to get free from the chains that kept them bound to the nearby tree. Days after the second sighting, the family found one of their German Shepherd dogs dead with a broken neck. The dog's collar was found next to the dead dog, still attached to the chain. The other German Shepherd, Missy, appeared in an addled state. The Catons observed that Missy continued acting strangely for weeks after the incident. So much so, she dug a hole, an 8-foot hole in the ground. Investigators at the property later confirmed the existence of that hole, and they took evidence by taking photographs of it. The family told little about the sightings to friends, but the problems publicly came to light on August the 21st, 1978, about 10:30 p.m. The Catons and a few of their friends were relaxing on the back porch of their home, and behind the house was an old abandoned strip mine that had been out of use for many years. Beyond the mine was dense, unpopulated, hilly woods that the family rarely ventured into. Near the mine was an old chicken coop, and amongst the chatter of conversation, someone heard an unusual noise out near the chicken coop. The Catons and their friends turned to see what the commotion was, and noticed 2 pairs of yellow eyes peering back at them through the darkness. A close friend of the family, Scott Patterson, jumped into his car to turn on the vehicle's headlights towards the glowing eyes. And as he inched the car forward to better illuminate the pair of animals, the light revealed a huge hairy creature that stepped into and in front of 2 feline-like creatures as if to protect them. The witness would later describe the creature as well over 7 feet tall, with black and brown matted hair that covered its head and face. The creature turned its attention to the idling automobile and began running towards it. Seeing the creature quickly closing in on them, the witnesses ran into the home, while Patterson tumbled from the car to join the fleeing party. Inside the home, the frightened witnesses, some of the women, burst into tears. They called the Stark County Sheriff's Department. While they huddled inside, waiting for the authorities to arrive, The creature peered through the kitchen window, and it was illuminated by the back porch light. Patterson grabbed a loaded 22 caliber pistol, while Evelyn Caton snatched a 22 caliber rifle and began loading it. They noted that despite aiming their weapons at the creature, it stood by the window for about 10 minutes, showing no fear of the guns at all. Nobody shot at the creature, but all were careful to keep it within their gun sights. Evelyn said, "It was confusing. It didn't seem to want to bother anyone. It was just curious. We all felt that it wanted to be friends." After several minutes, the creature turned and moved silently away from the window. Deputy Sheriff James Shannon arrived about 15 minutes after the call. He said that the witnesses, when he interviewed them, described to him two cat-like creatures that they couldn't identify and a large monstrous creature. Years later, he recalled the incident. The sheriff said, "They heard something at the window, kind of like clawing and pawing, from what I remember. I don't think this creature, whatever the hell it was trying to get in, as much as it was saying, 'Hey, look at me, here I am.'" Sheriff Shannon noted that the family's terror seemed genuine, and everyone's description of the incident matched perfectly. Shannon did not suspect a hoax, not even a hint of it. The family and friends had definitely seen something, but he could find no rational explanation for what they'd seen. Shannon searched around the home and noted an alarming, strong stench near the kitchen window. He described it as an ammonia, sulphur, rotten egg smell. Additional deputies were called in and searched the area on horseback and in a four-wheel drive army surplus jeep. During the 6-hour search, they found unusual footprints in the woods behind the home. The footprints measured 14 to 16 inches long. When Mrs. Caton was asked if she thought the creature could have been a bear, she responded, "No, not unless they'd mutated." Regardless of the official conclusion, years later Shannon would call the investigation the most bizarre investigation of his 30-year law enforcement career. And family friend Scott Patterson, who was sceptical of past sightings, admitted to reporters that he was now a believer. And then, on August 22nd, 1978, about 9 p.m, Mrs. Mary Ackerman, daughter of Evelyn Caton, drove to Caton home to pick up a granddaughter. Mary turned into the Caton driveway and, to her surprise, saw the creature standing at the top of the hill, next to the abandoned strip mine behind the home. She described the creature as more than 6 feet tall, with stubby legs and hairy, indistinct features. Mary sat in the car and watched the creature until it finally turned and walked towards the woods behind the mine. She said, "It was shaped like a man, and it walked like a man. When a bear moves away, it goes away on all 4 feet. This swung up over the edge of the strip mine on 2 legs." Hal Caton had his second experience with the monster on August 23rd, 1978, at around 11 p.m. Caton saw the creature appear outside his home and quickly grabbed a gun and fired it into the air. The creature turned and fled. Hal noted that the same night as the family lay in bed, their home was pelted with rocks which pattered and clanked on the metal roof of their home throughout the night. The last Caton sighting of the Minerva Monster occurred 2 weeks after their home was pelted with the rocks. That was September the 8th, 1978. Mrs. Ackerman saw 2 ape-like animals moving about near the strip mine. She thought at first they might have been in a tree, but couldn't tell because of the hillside angle and the distance between them. She watched the creatures for a while until they disappeared into the woods. Virtually overnight, the Catons' homestead turned into a veritable media circus. Crowds came, the Catons said crowds and crowds were outside their home. They just grew so large. They had to post a no trespassing sign on the fences to keep Bigfoot hunters off their property as well. However, not all Bigfoot hunters were so intrusive. Researcher Jim Rasletter of Bigfoot Field Researchers Organisation arrived at the scene on October the 9th, so just one day after. His first find was with Henry Colt as they walked around the property. And Colt, who lived about 5 miles east of Minerva, or just off US 30, told Rasletter that he had seen the animal while on a walk through the woods near his home. Colt says the animal was squatting near a tree and it made a noise that sounded to him like a very loud cough. He described the creature as large, hairy, and bipedal. Next, the BFRO investigator interviewed the Caton family about their encounters with the creature. In his report, he noted that the Catons and their friends had no reason to concoct a hoax and seemed truthful and sincere in their stories. He also noted that all of the witnesses told the exact same story. They were very plain, simple, down-to-earth folk, and you could tell something had happened that really frightened them. There were never any inconsistencies with their stories, however many times he went over it. Another researcher who accompanied him confirmed his assessment of the family. He said some of the people were interviewed separately, and they all described the beast identically. All hoped that they'd never see it again. And to the researchers' surprise, they found that the Catons and many of their family friends had never heard the term Bigfoot before. Within weeks of the Caton sightings, others in the area began reporting similar encounters with the Minerva Monster. One man saw a large, hairy creature cross Route 30 near the Catons' home. It was a fog-shrouded night as he was driving down US 30, and all of a sudden, he said, this thing darted out in front of the vehicle. Another sighting occurred on Liberty Church Road, where a woman reported hearing strange noises in the woods surrounding her home. She described the sound as a cat fight or a woman's terrifying shriek. She reported to the authorities that whatever was making the noises had been harassing her for several months. 58-year-old David White said he heard mysterious sounds behind his Paris Township home, located at the rear of the Skyland Hills Mobile Home Park, near the Canyons property. Similar to the Liberty Church Road report, he described mysterious sounds echoing from the woods next to the small lake. His wife Connie confirmed this and said it's blood curdling when it does it. It's an awful sound, a curdling sound. It'll scare the hell out of you. In the years following the Catons incidents, reports of the Minerva Monster arrived from the neighbouring counties of Logan and Union. On June 24, 1980, Miss Donna Rigler, a legal secretary from Union County, was driving home from work on a stormy day. It was hot and lightning flashed in the distance. She slowed her car as she crossed over a set of rough railroad tracks and saw something lying in the road ahead. The creature appeared to be hunched over, and at first she thought it was a dog. And then, as the creature rose to two legs, she must have felt it was a man. When the creature turned to face her, she saw it was huge. It was hairy and it was a creature of some kind. It stared at her and held its hand out, palms up. She drove away quickly and stopped at the first home she came to. Inside the stranger's home, she collapsed. She broke down in tears. Today, the Caton family continues living on the property, although Evelyn and Herbert Caton have since died. Family members have installed fences to keep curiosity seekers away. They exhibit much scepticism when it is suggested that the animal that they saw was not a Bigfoot, merely a bear. The family continue to denounce any publicity, and they insist that they don't want the public attention focused on the case, but what they saw that day was a creature. Our last case tonight takes us back to England and an area in Yorkshire, not known back then for hairy creatures, although we know now most of Yorkshire area has a high number of strange cryptid creatures. This report came in from a chap who I'm going to call Jack Robin. Hi Debbie, you don't know me, but something happened to myself and a friend in May 1986, and I wondered if you would help me to work out what it was that we saw that night. To tell you the truth, I still can't explain what they were. I was out with a friend when it happened, and we were wagging school to go bird nesting. I remember it was Friday, and the weather was lovely and warm. Now, by the time things happened, we'd been out all day up to then, no good. You know what kids are like. We were bored and looking for something to do. We decided to go over to a wooded area called the Diamonds. That's just what it was known as. It's Howell Beck runs through it. It's just off the B6273. Now, the old guys we knew used to tell us to keep away from the Diamonds because it was haunted. So, we decided to go anyway. you know. I seen a nest up a tree, about 30 foot up in a crevice in the bough. So I climbed up there easily, but the nest was empty. I was bored. I just started to climb back down when my mate shouted, "There's somebody coming! They're coming through the brambles." So I stopped, I looked and I listened. And whoever was coming our way, they weren't being quiet about it. They're trying to stay hidden. They were making a right old noise, smashing through the foliage. You could hear the twigs and the branches snapping and a strange grunting noise. So half scrambling, half falling, I made my way halfway down the tree. But the noises were not stopping. They were getting louder and louder. So I jumped the last 12 feet into the brambles. Not a good idea, but at this point I was crapping myself. I clambered out of the thorns and scrub. I set off running as fast as I could. By the time we got there on the other side of the hedgerow, I could see the top of what looked like a strange head, and it was flanking us as we ran. They stayed hidden behind the bush, but they were keeping up with us, and they moved along with us at similar speed. We were a little in front, and I knew that it would catch up with us at the break point in the bushes ahead. So we got our heads down and ran as fast as we could to try and get up to and past the break before it did. It didn't work, and whatever was behind there beat us to it. We stopped dead in our tracks, and at that moment we realised there was no getting away as this thing just came into view. Honestly, I said, "Shit," as it was so big. Even as an adult, would consider this thing big. And we were kids. We were just lads of 13 and 12. It looked like a bulky mass of matted hair. The hair wasn't really long, but it was all tangled and full of twigs and dead leaves. I remember clearly what it looked like, and it didn't have a neck, just a head and big shoulders. And its face looked all gnarly and leathery, like its skin was all weathered. We ran, turned in the opposite direction, set off running up the middle of the cornfield like our lives depended on it. By now we were crying and grasping for breath, and when we looked over to the tree line about 100 yards away, there it was again, still flanking us. But as we turned to look back, we realised that the first one we'd initially seen was still at the break in the hedgerow, so there must have been at least two of them. We looked again and saw the second one stop, and by now we were about a third of a mile away from the top of our field, and we just carried on sprinting till we reached the top. As we got to the top of the field, we stopped to take a breather. I was actually physically sick. I was that scared, and from running so hard. My friend was sobbing. We looked back, and we all looked around, but we couldn't see it any longer. Then there was this sharp, shrill scream that was loud, really loud. By this point, we'd had enough, and we didn't hang about. We were off out of there like rabbits. To this day, I couldn't tell you what or it they were, because I've no idea. We often spoke about it, but my friend went his path in life and sadly died at 19 from an overdose. I still wondered if this had that much of an effect on him. He was a good kid, but he got in with the wrong crowd. I've only ever spoken to my wife about this. But what do you think they were, Deb? For years we said they were demons, but I'm not sure what they were or who they were now. I've been back there on numerous occasions, but up to now I've never seen or heard anything else. I do a lot of fishing and hunting, so I'm outdoors quite often. But I can honestly say what we saw that day has changed my whole mindset when I'm outdoors. I'm always looking over my shoulder and listening for any unusual sound. And to tell you the truth, sometimes I do hope to get another look, just to make sure I'm not crazy. And I did see that thing that day. I completely understand where this gentleman's coming from. His description of being outdoors as a kid and, seeing something impossible be recognised by many, many witnesses, myself included. In fact, I wrote about exactly this feeling in the first book I ever wrote, about witness accounts. I wrote about the subject of how it feels to be a child witness, and not have anywhere to go to or anywhere to speak to about. It's really hard. In America or other parts of the world, before the World Wide Web, the kids here in England, or anyone really in the British Isles, had not been able to connect a weird, dark, hairy it with a cryptid creature of any kind. We just never heard of them. It would have been lost, for comparison to explain what this thing was. And sadly, I still have to say the same thing is going on now. When people ask me what they saw that day, well, honestly, I don't know, do I? It's the most honest answer that I can give, along with, but you are not on your own, and more people are coming forward who have seen something similar. I also tell them that one day it will be just as easy to report a strange experience that features a weird, hairy, or impossible creature as it is to report a UFO, an abduction, or a ghost event. The witnesses to those events have to have a platform to share their experience on, and an audience who will hear their account. And that's why you guys are so important to me. Tonight, I'd like to thank all of the witnesses that have come forward and all the stories that they've shared with us. I hope you've enjoyed them. I put stories like this out every single week. So, for now, thank you very much for joining me, and I'll see you all next week. Good night, everyone.